The studio lights of The View burned hotter than usual, throwing long shadows across the glossy table where history was about to be staged. It wasn't just another morning broadcast. The set itself seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the walls understood what the audience was only beginning to sense. Something rare, something seismic, was about to unfold. And there she was, Oprah Winfrey, the woman whose very name carried the weight of an empire, seated with a poise that had been refined over decades of reigning as the queen of daytime television. Her presence was magnetic, every movement measured, every gesture speaking volumes before a word had even left her lips. Opposite her sat Whoopi Goldberg, moderator icon, survivor of Hollywood's roughest storms. She carried herself with a different kind of power, less polished, more combustible. Where Oprah built her kingdom on empathy and uplift, Whoopi had carved hers with blunt honesty, humor sharp enough to cut, and a refusal to bow. The cameras closed in. The audience, rows of faces barely blinking, leaned forward in their seats. They weren't watching just an interview. They were watching two cultural titans share the same stage, under the glare of truth and rumor. For years, tabloids had whispered stories of feuds, backroom clashes, secret rivalries. Headlines promised backstage fights, while anonymous sources swore that Oprah and Whoopi could never occupy the same space without sparks. Both women had denied, both had brushed aside the gossip. But gossip has a way of living longer than truth. And now, live, uncut, those rumors were being forced into the light. Whoopi's eyes flickered, betraying nothing but curiosity. She leaned slightly forward, her voice calm yet charged. Oprah, welcome. I don't think I have to tell you what it means to have you here. Oprah's lips curved into a gracious smile, though her silence, carried a weight that filled the studio. Finally she spoke, her tone warm but deliberate. It's been a long time coming, Whoopi. The audience applauded, sensing history in the making, but their cheers couldn't mask the undertone, the quiet awareness that beneath these pleasantries lay something deeper, heavier. Narration cut in like a gavel striking wood. This was not simply a conversation. This was confrontation with myth itself. The queen of talk television and the guardian of daytime's loudest roundtable now stood before each other, not as enemies, but as forces the world had long insisted could not coexist. And as the applause faded, tension swelled in its place, pulling every viewer into the moment. Something was about to crack wide open. The applause had barely faded when the weight of years of whispers pressed itself into the room. For a moment, neither Oprah nor Whoopi spoke. The silence was thick, not awkward, but charged, like the stillness before thunder. Everyone watching, in studio and at home, knew exactly what hovered between them. It wasn't just about this morning. It was about the rumor that refused to die. For over a decade, gossip blogs, tabloids, and viral YouTube thumbnails had painted a story of bad blood. Anonymous insiders whispered of fights in dressing rooms, frosty exchanges backstage, even outright shouting matches. Each time the rumor resurfaced, Whoopi dismissed it with a wave of her hand. She had even laughed about it once on air, saying, "People love to think women in power can't get along. It keeps the clicks coming." But denial never killed the story. Instead, it seemed to feed it. Screenshots of headlines became memes, and whispers became viral fodder. It didn't matter that Oprah herself rarely spoke on the matter. In fact, her silence became fuel, interpreted not as indifference, but as confirmation. Silence, in the theater of public opinion, is louder than denial. Now the two women sat face to face, the rumors crowding the air like uninvited guests. Whoopi tilted her head slightly, a faint smile playing at her lips. "You know, Oprah, folks out there think we've been circling each other like boxers for years." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience, but it carried tension more than humor. Oprah's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in the calm precision she was known for. She let the pause linger, then spoke. "It says more about the people spreading it than it does about us." The words were soft, but edged like glass. Narration swept in, underscoring the weight. This was more than idle chatter. This was a case study in how America devours its icons, how the culture machine pits women, especially black women, against one another for spectacle. The rumor had survived because the public needed it to survive. Conflict sells, peace doesn't. The camera cut briefly to the audience. Wide eyes, nervous chuckles, people whispering to their neighbors. They weren't here for peace. They wanted resolution, one way or another. And with that unspoken demand pressing on them, the stage became more than a set for morning television. It became a courtroom of cultural judgment, with two women as both witnesses and defendants. The air inside the studio seemed to tighten, as though invisible walls were closing in, pressing audience and hosts into the same charged chamber. This was no longer light conversation. The silence had hardened, forcing both women into the roles history had carved for them. On one side of the table sat Oprah Winfrey, the monarch of television, a woman who had not simply hosted a talk show, but had reshaped the very architecture of daytime media. From her stage in Chicago, she had built a cathedral of empathy, transforming personal pain into collective healing, launching authors into the stratosphere with a nod, and elevating politicians with her endorsement. Her name had become shorthand for transcendence. Disagreement, a gospel of possibility wrapped in the language of self-improvement. On the other side was Whoopi Goldberg, an empire of a different kind. Where Oprah built bridges, Whoopi built fire escapes. She did not promise transcendence but survival. An EGOT winner who had navigated comedy, film, and television, she turned rawness into weaponry. On The View, she reigned not as a queen of uplift, but as a referee of chaos, cutting through nonsense with blunt humor, her voice unafraid to clash with politicians, co-hosts, or anyone who wandered into the crossfire. Narration wove the contrast like a verdict being read aloud. Two empires, two strategies, two languages of power. Oprah, the empire of elevation. Whoopi, the empire of confrontation. The audience seemed to sense it. They weren't watching mere colleagues. They were watching embodiments of two philosophies of cultural leadership. Whoopi leaned back, her hands folded. Her eyes gleamed with a touch of defiance, a flicker that said she knew the story the world wanted to write. You built a whole kingdom on compassion, Oprah, but compassion doesn't always cut it in this business. Oprah didn't flinch. Her voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial, yet sharp enough to slice through the hum of cameras. And cynicism doesn't build bridges. It just makes walls higher. The words landed with weight. The audience shifted, torn between applause and unease. This wasn't banter. It was a duel of philosophies. Narration rose again, painting the moment in stark colors. Both women had fought battles the public only half understood. Oprah had carried the weight of representation, asked to be America's conscience while never letting the mask of composure crack. Whoopi had carried another burden, the demand to be brutally honest, to laugh in the face of power, even when laughter cut her own reputation to pieces. They were not just individuals, all sparring across a table. They were avatars of how America expected women, and especially black women, to exist in the spotlight. One expected to uplift, the other expected to rebel. The tension was not personal, it was structural, generational, inevitable. And as the camera panned between them, two icons framed in the same shot, the contrast itself became explosive. The clash of empires was no longer rumor, it was unfolding, live. The table felt smaller now, the cameras closer, the audience quieter. Every shift of posture, every breath, every pause was magnified, turned into theater. The long prelude of rumors and history was over. Now, the first moves of the game had to be made. Whoopi broke the silence with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, her tone deceptively casual. Well, Oprah, people have been waiting a long time for this. I can't even count how many times I've had to tell folks we're not at each other's throats. She let the laughter of the audience ripple for a beat before adding, sharper, but maybe they just want to see if you and I can stand the same room without breaking the furniture. The studio erupted in half laughter, half gasp. It was a joke, yes, but also a challenge, an opening jab disguised as humor. Oprah's smile was steady, regal, the kind of smile honed through decades of tense interviews. She tilted her head slightly, her voice calm yet commanding. Well, I've always believed people project what they want to see. If they want war, they'll imagine war. If they want peace, they'll look for peace. What they see between us may say more about them than it does about us. The audience clapped, but not with ease. It was the kind of applause that rose cautiously, as if people weren't sure which side they were affirming. Narration threaded through the moment like a spotlight. Two queens had entered the same chessboard. Every phrase was a pawn advanced, every glance a knight shifting into position. Neither woman could afford a misstep, because the world was watching not for words, but for cracks. Whoopi tapped the table lightly with her finger, her tone quick, sharper now. "You know, that's easy for you to say when you've controlled the narrative your whole career. You've always had the luxury of deciding how people see you." Oprah's eyes narrowed just slightly. A flicker, almost imperceptible. But there. Her reply came measured, deliberate. "Control isn't a luxury, Whoopi. It's survival. You know that as well as I do." A hush fell over the audience. They weren't sure if they'd just heard agreement or accusation. Narration deepened the tension, painting the silence as verdict-like. The first real exchange had landed. Not personal yet, but charged with the weight of their legacies, their survival tactics, their ways of being in a world that had never let women like them simply exist without scrutiny. And in that silence, both women seemed to understand something the audience had not. This was only the beginning. The table between them was not a set prop. It was a battlefield, and neither had any intention of surrendering. The table gleamed under the lights, but it wasn't just a piece of furniture anymore. It was a dividing line between two legacies, two blueprints for how to survive power and shape culture. Oprah sat upright, hands clasped in front of her, her voice carrying the calm gravity of someone used to being both teacher and witness. "When I started in Chicago, nobody believed a little black girl from Mississippi could hold a daytime audience, but I learned something. If you give people a mirror, they'll see themselves. If you give them hope, they'll come back. That's how I built what I built." She paused, scanning the crowd. It wasn't about fame. It was about service. The audience murmured approval. A few clapped softly. Whoopi shifted in her chair, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned forward, her tone lighter, but her words heavy. "And service is noble, but let's not pretend it's the only way. I didn't build my career making people feel comfortable. I built it telling the truth, even when it pissed people off. That's how you survive Hollywood. That's how you survive politics. Sometimes, comfort is a lie." The studio fell quiet. Whoopi's delivery was blunt, stripped of polish, and that bluntness hit like a hammer. Narration layered over the moment like a slow drumbeat. One legacy rooted in uplift, the other in confrontation, one asking people to believe in their best selves, the other demanding they reckon with the truth. Neither wrong, neither simple, but irreconcilable in method. Oprah's eyes softened, but her voice grew sharper. "But confrontation without compassion leaves people lost, Whoopi. If you only tell them the world is cruel, you don't give them a way through it, you just give them another wall." Whoopi didn't flinch. She let the words hang, then answered, her tone dry but deliberate. "And if you only give them comfort, you risk making them forget how cruel the world really is. Some of us don't have the luxury of forgetting." A ripple passed through the audience. They weren't clapping now. They were listening, caught in the gravity of the exchange. Narration cut in, heavier now, reminding viewers of the stakes. These weren't just words tossed across a table. They were testimonies of two women who had lived through different battles with the same enemy, a society quick to consume them, quicker to doubt them. Oprah had chosen uplift to disarm that enemy. Whoopi had chosen confrontation to fight it head-on. And as their words collided, it became clear they weren't just defending themselves, they were defending the philosophies that had kept them alive, visible and powerful in a world that had often demanded their silence. The camera panned across the faces of the audience, some nodding at Oprah's gentle wisdom, others leaning into Whoopi's raw defiance. The room itself became divided, each viewer aligning with one queen or the other, as though the legacies themselves were on trial. And the trial wasn't over. It had only just begun. The conversation shifted almost imperceptibly, but the weight in the air announced it before the words did. What began as a clash of legacies was now edging into something larger. the realm of politics, power, and the way both women had shaped the American conscience. Whoopi's voice was steady, almost measured, though her eyes burned with a familiar fire. "See, Oprah, the thing is, when you sit in that chair, when you have that audience every single day, it's not just about stories. It's about politics, whether you admit it or not. You've told America how to feel about presidents, about wars, about elections. That's not just television, that's influence." The audience murmured, caught off guard by the bluntness. She wasn't wrong. Oprah's nods, her silences, her choices had indeed shaped more than ratings. They had shaped votes. Oprah folded her hands, her tone calm but sharpened with precision. "I've always said, my role is to inspire, not dictate. I endorsed when I felt the country was at a crossroads. And yes, I stood by Barack Obama because I believed in what he represented. But I don't tell people how to think. I give them reasons to think for themselves." Her words hung heavy, and some in the crowd erupted in applause. Whoopi tilted her head, her smile quick and edged. "But let's not pretend the line between inspiration and persuasion is that clean. When Oprah speaks, people don't just think, they move. And when I speak, people get angry. That's the difference. You get to inspire, I get to agitate. Both are political." Narration swept in, framing the moment like a judge explaining evidence to a jury. Both women had wielded political weight, but differently. Oprah's endorsement in 2008 had been credited with shifting momentum in a presidential race. Whoopi's sharp commentary on The View had sparked headlines, public outrage, and debates on cable news. Their voices weren't just entertainment, they were instruments in the machinery of democracy. Oprah exhaled softly, her gaze steady. "Anger has its place, Whoopi, but I've seen what happens when a country is fed only on outrage. People lose hope. They forget there's something worth fighting for. And then what? What's left?" Whoopi leaned forward, the edge in her tone unmistakable. "Hope without honesty is just sugar. Sweet for a minute, but it rots you if you live on it too long. My job isn't to hand out sugar. It's to make sure people don't fall asleep at the wheel." The words struck like a gavel. The audience gasped, then quieted, riveted. Narration pressed down with solemn intensity. This wasn't banter anymore. It was testimony on the role of media in democracy, on the burden of influence, on the cost of truth. The clash had left the personal behind. It was no longer about two women defending themselves. It was about how they shaped America, and whether inspiration or confrontation was the more honest path. And as the studio lights bore down, it was clear. The courtroom of public opinion had expanded. The trial was no longer just Oprah versus Whoopi. It was America versus itself. The studio had fallen into a stillness that felt almost unnatural. The exchange over politics had sharpened the edges, but now something deeper hovered in the silence. The one subject everyone had been waiting for. The audience could feel it, like the pause before a lightning strike, the rumor. Whoopi shifted in her chair, her hands folding slowly across the table. She glanced at Oprah, then at the audience, her voice calm but loaded with intent. "You know, we've danced around it long enough. For years people have said we hated each other, that we were fighting in dressing rooms, that we couldn't stand to be in the same city, let alone on the same stage. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I never had a problem with you. But maybe now's the time to ask, why does the world want us at war so badly?" The question cracked the air open. The audience gasped audibly. The producer's cameras swung closer, catching every flicker of expression on Oprah's face. Oprah didn't rush to answer. She sat in silence, her posture regal, her eyes fixed straight ahead. The pause stretched on, long enough to feel heavy, uncomfortable, deliberate. Then, in a voice low and steady, she spoke. "Because two powerful black women can't exist in the same space without people imagining a fight." The words cut through the silence like glass shattering. The audience erupted. Some clapped, some gasped, others shouted yes from the back rows. The reaction wasn't just to the words, but to the truth inside them, a truth everyone knew but rarely heard spoken aloud on daytime television. Narration swelled over the moment, sharp and resonant. This was no longer rumor, this was revelation. Oprah wasn't simply denying or dismissing, She was reframing the narrative itself, placing the blame not on their shoulders, but on a society that profits from division. A culture that cannot allow women of equal stature, equal brilliance, to share the spotlight without imagining a catfight. Whoopi leaned back, her eyes narrowing, her lips pursed. She let the audience roar settle before she responded. So what you're saying is, it's never been about us. It's about the story they wanted to tell. Oprah nodded slowly, her eyes still sharp. And the longer we stay silent, the more the story grows. Denial doesn't kill it. Silence feeds it. The audience hummed with agreement, clapping again, caught in the electricity of the exchange. Whoopi exhaled deeply, her voice carrying a touch of frustration, but also acknowledgement. You might be right. I've spent years swatting that rumor like a fly, and still it comes back. Maybe I gave it more life just by fighting it. Oprah's voice softened but carried steel beneath it. The truth doesn't need defending, Whoopi. It needs declaring. The words landed like a final gavel strike. Narration wrapped around the moment like a courtroom summation. The flashpoint had arrived. Years of whispers, years of blog posts and tabloid covers had been dragged into the light and dissected in front of millions. What was once a rumor had been put on trial, and for the first time, both women were witnesses against it, not against each other. The clash was no longer about ego, it was about myth, and the myth had finally been confronted.